And now, our feature presentation.
To create is to will change into the world. A single stroke of the pen or a flick of the brush can absolutely alter the psychology of a work of art and can likewise create such an intense impression on those who experience it. In theater, the slightest change or inflection can leave the audience spellbound or gut-wrenched. In art or painting, a sketch or a certain color can make the person viewing it feel melancholy or abject horror. In music, a sustained note or a key change can make a person feel butterflies in their stomach or amped with adrenaline that just makes them want to get up and move or fight someone. Every art form is valid, and there's a magic to creating. But as longtime viewers know, I'm most partial to the world of cinema, the best of all worlds, where art comes together. Every frame a painting, every cut a psychological choice for the audience to consider with artistic intent. Every clothing choice and acting decision carefully mulled over and planned to a T in order to either make a character charismatic or detestable. And every leitmotif in music is something that can sit in the back of a viewer's mind to provide a perfect punctuation point of art that can stay with someone forever. But creation is magic, and when magic is brought into the world, the universe can do everything in its power to snuff creativity like water to a fire. Whether it's an obstacle like money issues or work and life balance seemingly being thrown off at every single turn, it almost seems like it would be easier to give up and let sleeping dogs lie. Still, to create is a drive. It's an obsession, a gnawing feeling in the back of your mind that forces you to fight through adversity, hardships, and financial stumbling blocks. It can ruin relationships, make you feel every single negative emotion that is ever fully possible, and can even cause physical and mental strain on your person. But at the end of the day, when a project is seen to completion, there is no feeling more profound or exhilarating than to become a literal magician. And of all the filmmakers living and dead, I feel no one understands the power that the cinematic art form has to offer than one man in particular.
Spike Lee.
Spike Lee is one of the most powerful, influential, and knowledgeable figures in film history. Cutting his teeth with student short films that you can only see at film galleries, unfortunately, like Joe's Bed-Stuy, Barbershop, We Cut Heads, The Answer, and Last Hustle in Brooklyn, he graduated film school and became a powerful figure in the independent film scene with She's Gotta Have It. An at the time very progressive film that discussed sexual independence, and of course, his seminal masterpiece, Do the Right Thing. His style is brutal, intense, and always infused with his own personal views on politics, family, and the world by and large. While his films can vary from being masterclasses of visual storytelling to some of the most unwatchable works of art you'll ever see, She Hate Me in particular is just absolutely insane. they are all distinctly Spike Lee, from his narrative works to even his documentary joints. Save for Oldboy, he gets angry, he gets passionate with every frame and every line of dialogue he uses, and his themes leap out from the screen and stick with your mind to make you think critically about the world around you. After all, how could you expect less from the man who named his production company 40 Acres and a Mule, the reparations owed to every black man upon the dissolution of slavery? And perhaps one of the best ways he conveys his messages are through his needle drops. Any editor and filmmaker worth their salt knows the power that the marriage of sound and image can convey. It's something I keep in mind with every musical and visual choice I make when I direct my own films and edit my own video essays. So many iconic lines in cinematic history are made so due to the right song or the right score being played.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Hey, Doc, we better back up. We don't have enough road to get up to 88.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine.
To infinity and beyond!
Here's Johnny!
Music is intrinsic to the cinematic experience, going all the way back to when The Jazz Singer in 1927 became the first feature-length film to have synchronized dialogue and music. A very problematic history that Spike Lee himself is aware of, and has even commented on in his 2000s film Bamboozled.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you, you ain't heard nothing.
And Spike Lee's needle drops are iconic. Whether he blasts the pulsing rhythm of Public Enemy's Fight the Power against an almost stage-like theatrical production of Rosie Perez dancing as a passionate and angry mirror of Bye Bye Birdie's opening performance in Do the Right Thing, the sight of spotlights shooting into the night sky across various parts of New York where the Twin Towers once stood, as Terrence Blanchard's hauntingly melancholic score cries out in the opening credits of 25th Hour, or the bone-chilling decision of opening The Five Bloods with Marvin Gaye's Inner City Blues over historical footage of not only the Vietnam War, but societal progress and upheaval in the 60s and 70s in America and around the world to not only provide historical context, but to also have the audience live through the Bloods' past before we experience their present. He uses these musical moments to highlight these struggles have not gone away. And while we're able to escape through cinema, we're constantly having one foot in reality and one in fiction. But of all his needle drops, the one that I think goes on as not only one of the best moments in film history, but one that transcends the silver screen to become one of the most profound and important statements in any work of art, is in his grand epic 1992 picture, Malcolm X.
Do you know where you came from? What's your name?
Malcolm Little.
No. That's the name of the slave masters who own your family. You don't even know who you are.
From now on, I speak my own words and I think my own thoughts.
Biopics are seen nowadays as low-hanging fruit for prestige filmmaking. But the life and death of Malcolm X was something that had been itching to be immortalized on the silver screen since 1967. And Spike Lee took the ball that was the autobiography of Malcolm X and ran it all the way to the end zone. Clocking in at a whopping 3 hours and 21 minutes, Lee quite literally paints a portrait of a life in real time. As the trailers say, he was a pusher, a hustler, a thief, a follower who became a leader. And the way Lee, cinematographer Ernest Dickerson, and Denzel Washington fly through Malcolm's entire life feels almost effortless. Excessively stylistic and flashy in the first third, Isolating and angry in the second, and haunting in the last, they show every single facet of his character. Arguably more than most snapshots of a famous figure's life that we call a biopic. But the scene that's branded itself in the back of my mind ever since I first saw this picture is, for me, the ultimate culmination of creative, artistic, and societal magic. In quite a literal sense, this film should not exist, and should not work as well as it does. Spike Lee, in fact, almost didn't get to make it. Originally, filmmaker Norman Jewison of In the Heat of the Night fame was going to direct a feature-length film with a screenplay from Arnold Pearl, the director of the Malcolm X documentary in 1972, as well as acclaimed writer James Baldwin. But the idea of a white man doing a film about such a prominent figure of the civil rights movement did not sit well for some. As Spike Lee put it,
never have I said only a black person can direct black subject matter. But it takes a very sensitive white director to get the nuances of what it means to be African American in this country.
But the story had been one that he had been passionate about as a young man, talking with Ernest Dickerson about making it in film school when they were together. It was one of his dream projects. And as it so happens, Jewison had graciously stepped down after immense backlash from the African American community. And due to Lee's rising star in Hollywood, hot off the presses of Do the Right Thing, he was approached by the studio developing the film to direct. That was perfect. Except for one thing. It's the hot thing to call out Warner Brothers, as they are absolutely in the process of shooting themselves in the foot with a Jesse Ventura-sized minigun of bad financial decisions and even worse leadership. And while there's a long storied history of this studio screwing over legendary filmmakers, both in the past as well as in the recent present, you have to understand how monumental for a second that this was for Spike Lee. The brothers Warner had released the Pearl documentary back in the 1970s, and they wanted to pick him, a still green independent filmmaker who had only done at that point 5 feature-length slice-of-life films, to bring Malcolm X to life cinematically, with an actor who had already portrayed the same historical figure not long ago on Broadway. Lee had the keys to the kingdom, as it were, and wanted to tell a story worthy of the big screen, painted with a David Lean-style cinematic canvas. And Warner Brothers was not having it.
With the film over budget, the Bond company representative tried to curb costs by canceling the overseas shoots.
The Bond company wanted to shoot in the Jersey Shore in January instead of Sahara Desert.
Imagine Malcolm X is a 90-minute movie with Egypt shot on the beaches of Jersey with matte paintings of the pyramids in the background.
The studio wanted a Spike Lee joint. Spike Lee wanted to make a joint with studio money. They expected Spike Lee to stay small scale, costing about $20 million something dollars, and maybe capping the length of the film at around 90 minutes. Spike Lee wanted to go grand, budgeting the production at over $30 million, and wanted to sprawl from the streets of Brooklyn to the land of Mecca. It was a push and pull that drew constant ire from the studio heads. And likewise, the reputation of Spike's boundary-pushing cinema led to its own fair share of controversy, including black nationalists and a lot of people in the African American community worrying that he'd more or less ghettoized such an important figure, which resulted in the studio shutting down production due to the ballooning budget with a Bond company.
We were in New York, finishing up the scratch mix. They came in with a piece of paper It said, all work has got to be stopped at this very moment.
All the people in post-production received a registered letter saying they were fired and their service no longer be needed. I was going crazy. How are we going to finish this film?
If it weren't for the fact that Lee had sought out the help of other prominent African-American celebrities, the film might have stayed just a dream in the glint of Spike Lee's artistic eye.
And I made the list, but it took me like 2 weeks before I called anybody. It was a hard thing to do, because I was begging. I could not say it was a tax write-off because that would be a lie. I cannot say that they get participation in the film because there was no participation. What I asked them was a gift, so the film that we envisioned could be realized.
It was an intentional gamble that jeopardized Lee's relationship with big studios, as no other production company would allow him to go as wild and intense with his vision. Hell, even now in the advent of streaming services. But it was one that he saw as a noble sacrifice. What mattered wasn't whether or not studio execs sitting in their ivory towers were satisfied, but that a marginalized community could display one of their proudest and loudest icons for the world to experience in their full glory.
And if you knew him, you would know why we must honor him. Malcolm was our manhood, our living black manhood. This was his meaning to his people, and in honoring him, we honor the best in ourselves.
Malcolm X is you, all of you. And you are Malcolm X.
I'm Malcolm X! I'm Malcolm X! I'm Malcolm X! I am Malcolm X! I am Malcolm X!
And all of the fruits and labors pay off during Malcolm's walk to the end of his life. After his pilgrimage to Mecca, Malcolm has a rejuvenated sense of unity in his teachings and faith after walking amongst a whole sea of Muslims, black and white.
Now, my first concern, of course, is with the group to which I belong, for we, more than any others, are deprived of our inalienable rights. But I believe the true practice of Islam can remove the cancer of racism from the hearts and the souls of all Americans. And if I can die having brought any light, having exposed any meaningful truth that will help destroy this disease, then all the credit is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds, and only the mistakes have been mine.
Upon his return to New York, he denounced a lot of the harshest sentiments that he had cast out in response to Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches in the wake of Selma and the Little Rock Nine, and his comments in the news after the passing of John F. Kennedy.
Don't you even feel a little bit of remorse, saddened by the President Kennedy's assassination?
Chickens coming home to roost never made me sad. In fact, it's only made me glad.
Instead, he decides to create the foundation of Afro-American unity, which is less about total racial separation and antagonism, and more about unity and tolerance. A far cry from the loud, boisterous, and aggressive words of the past that garnered him negative attention from the law, the media, and the Nation of Islam. A fiery winter night makes Malcolm realize that his troubles with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad aren't just verbal or political, but now moral and physical, as he is forced to retreat his home, his sanctuary, from a roaring inferno in the same way that his own family had done years ago. Threats mount, and when he's preparing for a speaking event at the Audubon Ballroom, he and his family get cold-called by nameless figures who keep alluding to something horrific happening if he were to go.
But I've been thinking about what's been happening to me lately, to us lately, and I just think I'm going to stop saying it's just the Nation of Islam. They're not working alone.
And then, after wishing his wife a good night and assuring her to come to the presentation, this happens. Suddenly, the opening strings of Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come fades in, almost like an operatic tragedy about to play out before our very eyes, and becomes deafening to our ears. Malcolm, Betty, their children, and the men who will soon gun down Malcolm all drive to the ballroom. Everyone is silent. Everyone is tense. The assassins know what they're going to do, and they're jittery, peering over their shoulders at every turn and trying to stay cool. But Malcolm, he's steely. Even as people pass him by, chances are they are the men about to make him leave this mortal plane, or just an innocent driver who happens to recognize him. He keeps his eyes on the road. In fact, he's driving with no urgency at all. A calm demeanor that Denzel Washington, Spike Lee, Ernest Dickerson, and Barry Alexander Brown, the editor of the joint, portray with the same tone as a man who is walking to the gallows. Brother Benjamin 2X knows that something is off when Malcolm isn't there yet, but Brother Earl reassures him he'll be there like clockwork. But things are already set in motion, as the assassins have made their way to the ballroom, having assimilated themselves as audience members, even helping Malcolm's daughter retrieve their dropped toy. Wolves in sheep's clothing, who can turn the charm on and off like the safety latch of a gun. The culmination builds as Malcolm finally parks, a little ways away from the venue, and he just sits there. A cop car passes by the window, and as Sam Cooke cries passionately in the backing track, we get the patented Spike Lee double dolly shot as Malcolm is almost propelled forward down the sidewalk. But instead of being showy like his previous attempts at the shot in School Days or Mo Better Blues, it's almost foreboding. He moves like a ghost floating down the street, dead-eyed and petrified with fear. And just as Sam Cooke's lyrics become filled with home, he snaps out of his dissociative funk at the friendly sight of an older woman who recognizes him and gives him some reassuring words that help him find the strength to carry on.
Are you okay? Good. I recognize you. Don't you pay them folks no never mind. You just keep right on doing what you doing.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll pray for you, son.
Oh, thank you.
Jesus will protect you.
An ironic end to the scene, and Malcolm knows this, because unfortunately, history's already set in stone. As after this scene, he goes on stage and gets executed in brutal fashion in front of his family, his brothers, and his audience. A martyr who will hopefully inspire change in death that he tried to forge in life. In a filmmaking perspective, this scene is a masterclass of tension and catharsis. But Spike Lee isn't one to use a song haphazardly and not think about the context in which the lyrics and the music would evoke. He chose Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come for a reason, and it isn't just because of the fact that it's such an emotionally charged song that will surely bring chills to anyone with an earshot. In fact, as the story goes, Alan Klein, the song caretaker for the Sam Cooke estate, is very protective of the song, barely ever licensing it out to anyone. Up until that point in time, there was only one other person who had been able to license it out for fair use.
The assassination of Malcolm X was an unfortunate tragedy.
But Spike Lee fought and hand-delivered the final scene to show Klein personally and pleaded his case that the film needed it. And Klein responded, "I was convinced. It was such a powerful scene. And I know this sounds mushy, but I think Sam would have wanted it." The only caveat? There was to be no credit during the ending roll, it was not to be included on the soundtrack, and the $100,000 Klein would receive for the rights would go straight to the United Negro College Fund. These sound like steep conditions, but when you consider what Alan Klein is most known for, these are on the lower end of unreasonable. But in order to fully comprehend why this song is so powerful, I feel we need to take a step away from Malcolm X, both the film and the historical figure, and talk about the man behind the voice. Let's talk about Sam Cooke.
That's the sound of the men working on the chain.
Sam Cooke is a man I feel barely needs an introduction, but oddly is one of the least recognized singers of his generation. In the early 1960s, he was primarily known for singing love ballads and sunshiny pop with beautiful tunes like What a Wonderful World and Chain Gang being crossover hits all across America, in particular, especially with white audiences. His passionate voice and lovely lyrics were enough to captivate listeners to pay attention to whatever music spoke to him. But that didn't mean he was blind to the world around him. The prejudices and injustices he felt as a black man were insurmountable, and at times, he even weaponized that in his art. As did one big influence near the end of his very short career and even shorter life.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man?
Speaking of musicians who need no introduction, Bob Dylan's influence in the world of music is damn near too heavy to even mention. If there's one man who had his pulse on the world and the struggles therein, it's definitely Bob Dylan. Some debate whether art is inherently political or not, but to him, it always is. From tunes like All Along the Watchtower to Only a Pawn in Their Game being a response to Medgar Evers' murder, there was never anything he did that didn't have the spark of the real world to ignite his artistic flame. One notable example was Blowing in the Wind. It had to be a perfect confluence of being in the right place at the right time. Or in Sam Cooke's case, the wrong place at the right time. As he listened to Dylan's song around 1963 and was struck with the opening lines, how many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? In the novel Dream Boogie, The Triumph of Sam Cooke, author Peter Guralnick explains that upon hearing the song, Cooke was so carried away with the message and the fact that a white boy had written it, he was almost ashamed to have not written something like that himself. And it wasn't like Cooke never touched on more serious matters. After all, he did a lovely cover of Old Man River, a powerful song from Hammerstein and Jerome Kern, which in itself was an inverse of old minstrel and Confederate songs, namely Dixieland.
Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland.
He don't plant potatoes, he don't plant cotton. Damn that plants them, he's soon forgotten. But Old Man River, he just keeps rolling along.
It was taking power away from the hateful art that preceded it. But Cooke sings it less like a wistful longing for something new, and plays it off like a swinging, bubbly tune which contrasts the heavy lyrics. Whether it was Cooke's intent to try and find positivity and change, or just a demand from the record company, we couldn't say. But when compared to the incomparable Paul Robeson, for whom the song was made for, and the Ray Charles cover which came out the same year as Blowing in the Wind, it's like listening to Sesame Street.
That old man River, he don't say nothing, but he must know something.
I want you to know he keeps on rolling along.
But it was something that weighed heavily on Cooke's heart. Blowing in the Wind festered its way into the back of his mind in the year of our Lord 1963, undoubtedly the worst year in his short life. Perhaps it was because of the fact that he thought he had to split part of his soul with his music by straying away from his gospel roots. Maybe it was because of the fact that he had just lost his 18-month-old son from drowning that same year. Or maybe it was the fact that at that point in time, civil unrest had been at what felt like an all-time high. But whatever the case, the catalyst for everything came one fateful night in Shreveport, Louisiana. Sam Cooke had arrived with his family and entourage to stay the night at a Holiday Inn to get ready for a show. But the clerk was nervous upon seeing a slew of black people in front of him and proceeded to say that there was no vacancy. While Cooke's brother Charles tried to calmly settle the matter, Sam was absolutely livid and risked his own life to call the police and try to sort the matter out. Instead of getting a room at the Holiday Inn, they found vacancy in a cell in the police station for disturbing the peace. He was full of righteous fury. He had played by all the rules, and here he was, sitting in a jail cell for the crime of just trying to get a hotel room. It mulled in his head for so long that he thought back to Bob Dylan, the civil unrest, and hearing 4 famous words from one of the most revered civil rights leaders to have ever walked the earth.
I have a dream.
Sam Cooke did have a dream, and that dream was his next song. It was both the easiest song he had ever made, as well as one of the heaviest. No longer shackled by the fear of losing his audience and a spark lit from under him, he assaults the audience with a sweeping orchestra that evokes the passion and fervor of a gospel sermon. The strings in the first verse, the horns in the second, and the timpani in the bridge help carry the song with a gravitas and prestige that befits those of the 2 towering figures in the civil rights movement that inspired him. And the lyrics are deeply personal, calling parallels to his cover of Old Man River by lifting a line from it wholesale, almost recontextualizing his whole career up until that point of catering to an audience that, despite everything, still saw him as lesser.
It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die.
As grandiose and extravagant as the song is, his lyrics are personal, recounting various points in which he had been turned away from the world, kicked around, and treated worse than dirt. Especially with these words that were at a point incredibly controversial and were even censored for a time.
I go to the movie and I go downtown. Somebody keep telling me don't hang around.
He pours his soul into every single lyric, almost as if he's pleading to the audience to listen, truly listen to him. It's a cry for help that ultimately ends on an optimistic note, the idea that change can come, and he just needed to let everything out for just a second, as if he would have literally keeled over and died if he didn't get his worries off of his chest. It should have been the biggest moment of his whole career. It was the song he was the most proud of, the song that he put everything on the line for, and he was ready to share it to the world during a guest spot on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, a week after he had just finished recording it. But there's no footage of that performance. The other performance that he did on that show is widely available, but not A Change Is Gonna Come. Why? Well, the moment that should have been his was ultimately overshadowed by another performance that would sweep the world by storm.
Now tonight, you're going to twice be entertained by them. Right now, and again in the second half of our show. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
It was as if the universe completely rejected Sam Cooke's call for change. A chance for a whole generation of children and adults to listen to his pleas as a downtrodden African American that painted a picture of his struggles through the art form that he loved was ignored for 4 white boys from Britain. It broke him. As James Sullivan describes in his book, Which Side Are You On?, Cooke was unsettled by the song's grave tone, and his friend Bobby Womack agreed, admitting that he thought the song sounded like death. In the brief time he had left, Cooke declined to sing it again. And he was true to his word, all the way up until his untimely death on December 11th, 1964, almost a year to the date since he had dreamt up the song. People tried to honor him and the message in which the song carried with it. But as mentioned before, Alan Klein only let Martin Luther King Jr. use it once, and no one else had done it since. Until Spike Lee came along. Lee knew the power the song held and understood it needed to be shared with as wide of an audience as possible during the lowest moment of one of the most iconic men in the African American community. In the same way that Cooke used illusions of impactful black art to convey a message, Lee does the same with his direction. Evoking the direction of David Lean for the Mecca pilgrimage, as well as lifting images from D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, not to romanticize the Klan, but rather to recontextualize them as the monsters they were. And of course, there's Malcolm's last moments. The art of the montage is something Lee, a film studies professor at New York University, understands wholeheartedly. Not only does he mind the symphonic instrumental that for a second could be mistaken for regular collaborator Terence Blanchard's work, but the way in which he cradles Cooke's powerful words around the absolute perfect moments. The opening lines call back to Malcolm's father and his experiences with the Klan, and how history repeats itself, but with a different shade of color.
I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, and just like the river, I've been running ever since.
The way Cooke practically shouts to a higher power that it's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die because I don't know what's up there beyond the sky, over a stage where Malcolm has to give a speech and over men looking over his shoulder as he drives, is powerful symmetry. Having Cooke sing about somebody telling him don't hang around whenever he goes out in public as one of the assassins helps his daughter get her dolly back creates a haunting realization that Malcolm is going to die. And worse yet, it'll be at the hands of the men who he called brothers. The repetition of the chorus almost feels like Lee and editor Barry Alexander Brown dreading what's about to come. As if to say, we can change this. It's a film, isn't it? But like Lee would say, film is a powerful medium. And while revisionist movies have their place in cinema, to change fate is to challenge the universe. Instead, it's a reminder that while yes, this is a film, it's a piece of entertainment, this was real life. But the moment that really sings is when Cooke sings the lines,
Then I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees.
Malcolm wants nothing more than to run away from his fate. He knows nothing good will come from this. Everyone around him knows it. He's risking his life even being out on the road. And as Spike Lee's own screenplay explains, Malcolm parks his car. It's 4 blocks away. He turns off his ignition and sits there. It's as if he's frozen in the car. If he were another man, he could ask for protection. but he's aware. In the song, Cooke means for his brother to mean the establishment, tearing him apart. Here, it shows that Malcolm is literally in a damned if he does, damned if he doesn't situation. Even if he could, he's still a black man in America, and the cops loom over him as dangerously as the Nation of Islam. Then, Sam Cooke cries out, and on that cry, we cut to Spike Lee's iconic double dolly. And the words, "There's been times that I thought I couldn't last for long," echo through the soundtrack at the peak of the sound mix. Lee uses this disorienting mix of sound and cinematography to convey what's written on the page. Malcolm has stopped in his tracks, like some unseen force has overcome him which prevents him from moving. Malcolm is paralyzed. What we see here is a convergence of black history, film history, and musical history to make this scene hit as hard as it does. Historically, we see Spike Lee offering as vivid a window as possible into the last moments of an icon's life. An empathetic perspective to a man who would become a martyr and let us feel every ounce of his fear and disassociation, punctuated by dramatic irony as we know the wheels of fate are spun in motion already as Malcolm walks to his death. We get to know a fraction of what Malcolm must have felt in that walk to the Audubon Ballroom. Artistically, we see Spike Lee putting his authorial stamp onto an important film for an entire community by employing a shot that would go on to be a key signature in his career. But the shot itself is lifted from African-American filmmaker Melvin Van Peebles in his feature-length debut, The Story of a 3-Day Pass. In the same way that Cooke turns the words of Old Man River to create new context, so does Spike Lee, by alluding to black film history to fight the powers that be and make the film on his own terms to create magic. Musically, we see an artist who was largely ignored during his defining moment being given the biggest spotlight possible, linked to one of the many icons that he saw and tried to stand with, to the point where most people hear this song and think of this scene in particular. Even if it wasn't on the soundtrack, the moment doesn't call to be felt anywhere else. In fact, it was so iconic, not only did Michael Mann use Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come in the middle of his Muhammad Ali biopic in 2001 to denote that Malcolm X had died,
Then I go to my brother, yes sir, and I tell him, I said, brother, help me believe.
But Regina King alludes to this moment in particular during her feature-length debut One Night in Miami, based on the play by Kemp Powers, by having Sam Cooke, as portrayed by Leslie Odom Jr., perform the song for the one and only time he ever did it live on The Tonight Show as the film wraps to a close.
It's been a long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will.
Art begetting art. History being reforged through creation. And while in Lee's Malcolm X, we see Malcolm find the strength to carry on after feeling seen by a passerby on the street, assuring that change can come, but it'll just take some time. It's hard to look at how the years have been since both Malcolm's assassination as well as the film's release. And the way mainstream and social media seems to only fuel the fires of hate and make the divides between people of color and those in positions of privilege wider and wider. At times, it feels as though we're seeing a normalization of prejudice from not only bigots, but also disenfranchised minorities that seem to have found themselves brainwashed by those who want them to believe that they can be better than those that are worse off. A whole battalion of Uncle Toms. It's a fight that Spike Lee has tried to carry on in his career. His use of film language, with his pulse firmly set on the vein that is the real world, carries even now, especially with his Academy Award-winning film Black Klansman. But there are times that the fight just seems overwhelming, and that history just seems to keep repeating itself. But Malcolm X and Sam Cooke had to believe that change was going to come, and Spike Lee has to believe it as well. And it has to, right?
I wish somebody would come and ease my troubling mind. Yeah, I wish somebody would come and ease my troubling mind. Oh, yes, I do. Why won't somebody come and ease my troubling mind? Yeah.
You want to know how long this has been in development for? This originally started life as a video for Nando V Movies' one musical scene series that he was doing. I want to apologize for how long it has taken to get back into the swing of uploading videos. I have had a lot of issues going on, both personally as well as professionally, with my life, with my family, with my friends. Even with me trying to make movies, there has been so much going on that it's been overwhelming, and I had to step away from creating for a long while just so that way I could get the drive back to create again. I am relaunching the Patreon. In fact, if you're watching this on Patreon, you're watching this a couple of days early because of the fact that I went ahead and released it 48 hours earlier, and this coincides with the 60th anniversary of Sam Cooke's passing. I want to thank you guys so much. Take care, stay safe, and I will see all of you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Why won't somebody come and ease my